Plants myself, I hate them, but what are you going to do?
On September 17th, 1974, the trial of Sam Lovejoy began before a jury and Judge Kent B. Smith in Franklin County Superior Court. Admitting that he had toppled the tower, he intended to present evidence showing his right, in his words, his duty, to take such action.
I had to lay out to them, 1, the health dangers, 2, the fact that I had no recourse, and that 3, therefore, the only way that I could confront this society was to destroy a certain kind of property, a very special kind of property, this tower, and then I had to walk into court and say to those people, this man is not guilty of bad conduct. This man should be lauded for trying to stop an infernal machine. And so in my opening statement to the jury, I said to the jury, look, Sam Lovejoy does not care about his own existence. That the existence of Sam Lovejoy means nothing in comparison to future generations and in comparison to those real live people sitting in that jury box who had to confront themselves and say, I have grandchildren, and I will have great-grandchildren, and I might die, but I'll have great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. And all those people are going to be hung under a cloud, a dismal cloud. And I just had to tell people that the raw gamble that was being handed to the citizens of Franklin County and ask them if they wanted to send Sam Lovejoy to jail for 5 years when they confront his act with the nuclear power plant reality, the concept of jail, should this person go to jail.
Lovejoy soon put himself on the stand in his own defense. An attorney, Mr. Thomas Lesser, led him through the story of his life, tracing the long road that led Lovejoy to the Montague Plains that night. Was there one single thing, personally or in writing, that influenced you the most in your decision to topple the tower? Yes. Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that was? A little 4-year-old girl named Sequoia. I mean, it's like an existential question. I mean, who is Sam Lovejoy? Just Sam Lovejoy, a 27-year-old human being. Who is he to tip over a tower and stop a plant and be outraged? I kept saying to myself, is it me? Who am I? Do I have the strength, the responsibility? Do I have the right? Going back and forth constantly. But it was impossible for me not to tip over that tower and live in a house with 2 young children who had no control over their own lives. As his first witness, he called the author of Poisoned Power, Dr. John Gofman.
I was quite interested in this trial, and I felt that I have a moral and social obligation to testify at his trial. The issue is one of the greatest moral, social, and ethical issues of our times and of all times. That is why I felt it imperative that I indicate my willingness to be here.
Although the judge listened to hours of compelling testimony from Dr. Gofman, he decided to withhold the testimony from the jury. Lovejoy next called Dr. Howard Zinn, professor of political science at Boston University, to testify on the history of civil disobedience.
Well, if my trial testimony had an essence, I like to think it did.
Boston University, to testify on the history of civil disobedience.
Well, if my trial testimony had an essence, I like to think it did. It was about the necessity of civil disobedience in times of danger to life and liberty and health, and how historically in the United States we have seen many, many times how the ordinary institutions of government, those hallowed things presented to us in the 4th grade as the 3 branches of government, are really very inadequate in protecting us, as we've seen from the number of wars we've engaged in, from the number of people who have died in industrial accidents, from the number of people who have been exploited in this country by corporations. These governmental institutions have not been very adequate to protect people, and from time to time, when grievances became too deep, groups of people had to go outside the machinery of government, had to break the law, had to commit civil disobedience in order to dramatize something that was happening. This was done by the labor movement. It was done by black people at various points in our history, and before the Civil War and the Underground Railroad, in recent years in the Civil Rights Movement. It's been done by women in protesting against inequality. And it seemed to me that after the most recent acts of civil disobedience, that is against the Vietnam War, maybe the time is right now for people to look closer to home at the dangers to our lives posed by corporate control of our lives.
Well, civil disobedience has been with us for a great many centuries. I think one could go back into Christianity or other religions and find a great deal of civil disobedience. The difficulty with it is where you draw the line. What's right for you and what you believe is right for mankind, you may not share with me, and I may not share with you. I may not like your lifestyle. I may decide that where you live is endangering me, and I may go over and put a match to it and say, burn it down. I'll be very careful to go when there's no one home, but it would be, I think, wrong of me to do that, and I think perhaps it's wrong to destroy private property. I think there's plenty of opportunity for a full airing of this plant without having toppled that tower. And I do want to say that that is a very private opinion from an individual. My company has been very careful to take no stand on this and did not prosecute Mr. Lovejoy and did not appear in court. This was an action with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so that is a private opinion. Very difficult line, civil disobedience. Good for Gandhi, but perhaps not good for then Adolf Hitler.
The process really has gone on for 100 years. That is, as soon as we began to have in this country what you call an industrial revolution, as soon as you began to have mines and mills and steam, and as soon as the companies began wiping out the forests, and as soon as they began pouring wastes into the rivers, we began to have an environmental problem, just the beginnings of it, but didn't pay much attention to it. And civil disobedience was directed at other things. Now, the enormity of what they are doing to us, the very air we breathe, the very water we drink, the very space we occupy, and now with the special dangers of atomic radiation and our kids and leukemia and all of that, the time is right for people who are against this to really do their act of protest for all of those people who in the past 100 years were not able to feel the issue deeply enough or did not have the capacity or the ability to do anything about it.
Civil disobedience or justification or a strong belief in what you were doing, therefore you're justified in breaking the law. I don't think there's just there's no basis for it in law, and there cannot be any basis for it in law. And there are some that believe that I have the right to do it and I should not be penalized for doing it. Well, I think that statement in and of itself shows that there's no place in the law for that type of defense.
The law is not a holy thing. I remember and Dan Berrigan broke the law, and they interviewed his 80-year-old mother, and they said, oh, what do you think about your son? What do you think about him breaking the law? I guess they thought an 80-year-old woman would have 80 years of respect for the law behind her, and she'd give them the right answer. And Dan Berrigan's mother said, it's not God's law. And she had it there. The law is made by very mortal people, very limited people, very opinionated people, and people who have very special interests. They make the law, they tell us what the law is, and then they act as if it's holy writ. So, it's not a terrible thing to break the law. I'll make the statement as simply as I can. Far more violence to human life has been done in human history by people obeying the law than by people breaking the law. The greatest acts of damage to human beings have been done in conformity with the law, in conformity with government edicts and government decrees. The greatest harm to people has been official harm, not the harm done by ordinary citizens.
During the trial, Lovejoy called several witnesses to testify to his character. Betty Bell, a retired librarian from a nearby town, had known Lovejoy through her work in the anti-nuclear movement.
Having been conditioned for 65 years to a strict law and order thinking, it was very hard for me to change my mind about the destruction of property, which I've always been led to believe was bad. But I think it was a catalyst. I think that it stirred people and shook them out of their apathy. And I also looked back and read about the Boston Tea Party, the Shays Rebellion, and I thought a lot about a black lady who refused to go to the back of a bus, and that really started the civil rights movement. And I came to realize that it may be unfortunate, but in this country, so many good social changes have come out of rather desperate, drastic actions. So it changed my whole thinking.
A police officer has to look at civil disobedience as something that you shouldn't do, because the law takes a dim view of particularly destruction of property. There are many cases of where it has been destroyed with what people thought was sufficient reason. But it has to be with reason of something detrimental to other people, which is the idea that Sam was carrying out. It was not necessarily just detrimental to Sam, but to all mankind. I had a whole lot different view of disobedience after the trial. I cannot say that blanketly I agree with it, but I don't blanketly disagree with it.
Judge Smith had gone to great lengths to ensure a fair trial, partly because, as he noted at one point, this is probably one of the strangest trials ever held in Franklin County. One of the minor issues of the trial set Lovejoy free at an unexpected moment. He was charged specifically with the destruction of personal property, yet he had found and shown in court that the tower had been taxed and the bill had been paid as if the tower were real property or real estate. On the 7th day of the trial, the judge indicated that he might throw the case out of court because of this flaw in the indictment. The first person to argue against this was Lovejoy himself. The judge, however, was insistent in his desire to dismiss the case. At 2:50 p.m., Judge Smith called the jury in and instructed them to find Samuel Holden Lovejoy not guilty. In the days that followed the trial, the jury was polled by the local newspaper. They not only approved, by and large, of Judge Smith's decision, they also indicated that they thought the prosecution had failed to prove malice on Lovejoy's part.
Did you feel that the Commonwealth proved malicious intent?
They did not prove the point, no.
No.
That's the reason why I think that the jury would have acquitted him. The Commonwealth didn't prove the point that he was malicious when he did it. And I don't think he was. I don't think he's that type of man. He did that, in other words, he figured he'd sacrifice his own life, you know what I mean?
Right.
For the existence of the community in this area.
Right.
In other words, he was going to be the sacrificial man. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
He didn't care what happened to him. All he cared about was just the community at large, the generation and the generation to come. I figure he should have been acquitted because the Commonwealth failed to prove that point. See? When you, on a case like that, you can't just acquit a man through sympathy. I mean, you can't do that. You have to weigh the balance of the law and the way the law goes. See? And then you have to abide by that law. So the judge abided by that law. See? And I was really glad that he did what he did.
I always think that behind technical reasons in the court are substantial human reasons. And behind that technical decision of the judge based on is it real property, is it personal property, was a kind of moral pressure that the judge felt in the course of the trial put on him by the defendant and all the friends of the defendant, and the atmosphere of the courtroom, and the feeling was that, by God, this was the right thing to do.
The environment must be protected, and life must be protected, and somehow we've got to be able to confront this all-pervading technology that's beginning to drown us with some counterbalance. And the judge kept saying to himself, my God, I've got an issue here so huge, how am I going to allow in this evidence? How am I going to confront these huge issues when this man's life is at stake? So he was like trying to protect my rights as an individual and yet try and get this whole issue of nuclear power somehow digested in his mind. And that confrontation in the judge was, I think, where we really won the trial, because he became convinced that not only was I sincere in my belief that nuclear power plants were bad, but that maybe even I was right in doing the act that I did.
People forget that when we fought that revolution 200 years ago, we fought it in the name of the Declaration of Independence, and the Declaration of Independence said, governments are instituted for the purpose of protecting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was the phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Then when the revolution was over and they set up a new government and they wrote the Constitution, they did not use that phrase in the Constitution. They didn't say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They said life, liberty, and property. That tells you a little about the Founding Fathers and their interests. And in a sense, what we have to do in this country, of which this environmental action is part, we have to move that enormous distance, and also that short distance, from the Constitution to the Declaration of Independence. You could almost define where this country has to go by saying we have to move from life, liberty, and property to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
I mean, politics in America means freedom, liberty, life, and then property. Politics means people taking a political stand. It means a yes or no. It doesn't mean a bunch of foo-foo lobbying saying, no, I don't want this and I'll counterbalance this. There's no negotiation here. That's politics. That's saying there's no way that they can be built safely, and therefore there's no way they're going to be built. It's like saying we're going to have a safe war. I'm saying there's no safe wars. I'm saying there's no safe nuclear power plants either. These people are going to start to realize that, and when you take a concrete position, that's politics. When you take a social position and start to develop yourself as a social creature, that's when you get political. You're not a lobbyist anymore. You're not taking little negotiatory stands. You're saying no.
I think Sam was purely and simply concerned with what it would do to people in the final analysis if a plant is built on those planes.
And if the tower was toppled, it would give us a year to think it over, to learn and educate ourselves and, you know, have our eyes opened as to what the dangers were.
The time was awfully short in what we should decide as whether it was good for us or not good for us, whether it would bother us or not. The power companies had had years of research in this. They knew where they were going and what they were doing. We had not that background of knowledge. Therefore, we had to gain time. And I do believe in time that people will believe in this whole spectrum, the same as Sam does, and it will not be built. I firmly believe that.